Buongiorno. Anzi, salve, which is the other way that we Italians always say hello to each other. And salve means be healthy, which is a very old way that Italians had to remember that health is the most important aspect of well-being, right? So for the several people who knows me, I like to talk free. And especially today that we are here in Milan, in my city, I would love to talk free to you about all what is important and concerning my thoughts at my university, as in my professional life as consultant. But since I tend to take too much time when I speak freely, I decided to follow a script. I hope it won't be too boring for you to listen to a reading, ex cathedra lecture, because I brought with me a lot of pictures. And so I will not disrupt the program of bluesign from the very beginning. So let's go in media res. Google has issued a transparency report. Mark Zuckerberg says he wants to bring Facebook to an even higher standard of transparency. Mark Pritchard of Procter & Gamble recently gave an impassionate speech on transparency. Keith Weed of Unilever demanded more transparency from digital media. And even Sir Martin Sorrell of WPP, one of the biggest advertising, media, and marketing research networks, recently said it's important to be transparent. And the parade could, of course, be much longer. Transparency has become a buzzword. And that's bad, because words matter. With words, we shape how we relate to one another and to the world. Words frame what matters and why. They can be heartbreaking. They can illuminate our minds or enlighten our souls and our most ardent, burning aspirations. They can stand for entire progressive ideologies or ignite fascism and genocides. And yes, words can also stand for the change of things in our industry. Or they can even imply the transformation of the state of things in our industry. Allow me, therefore, to start by delving into the matter, or better said, what really matters, about the meaning of the word transparency, before addressing the reason why transparency has become such a trendy word. So let's start by saying that transparency is a word that reinforces a very effective metaphor. It is a powerful analogy, and one that awakes many points, many positive associations in us, like the brightness of a crystal, the limpidness of spring water, the clarity of the air at the first light at dawn. So that metaphor, when applied to our practice, should refer to the brightness, limpidness, and clarity of both our intent and our actions. But if we dig deeper into the layer of the so-called wisdom of words, we discover that the etymological meaning of transparency in the language of ancient Rome originally meant something else, something more. In fact, transparere, going through the appearances, is the real meaning of the word. And this is a very relevant spot. Transparency doesn't only mean doing everything possible to provide ourselves and others with a first layer of clarity about our intents and action, but it also asks us to move towards the never-ending journey that obliges us to always go beyond what things seem to be at first glance, to move forward and reveal what things really are. Thus, transparency means moving beyond the appearance of exactness of data, beyond the fiction of marketing, communication, storytelling, beyond the appealing words of policymakers' promises, and beyond the opinions expressed in social media's echo chambers. It is about our attempt to constantly ascertain the reality of facts, the truth of things. This is where the notion of transparency encounters the metaphor of depth, which only apparently seems to be its opposite. The oxymoron, deep transparency, or transparent depth, is the prerequisite for avoiding any form of superficial transparency. In fact, the opposite of transparency is not only the opaqueness and nebulousness of things, but also the blind acceptance of the surface of things. Let's make some concrete examples of today's superficial transparency in the sustainability discourse. We all know the huge amount of plastic waste in Pacific Ocean, and about the growing alarm about how the problem will dramatically increase as more plastic is produced over the next decades. Future calculations predict that we will have more waste plastic than fish in the sea by the year 2050. The story of the Pacific Ocean patch outraged us once the media enabled us to see images with our own eyes of the horrible plastic soup floating upon our beautiful blue ocean. And since we tend to react to what we see with our own eyes and neglect what is kind of invisible, those images manage to spark our indignation against what seems to destroy our sentimental and romantic love affair with the beauty of our planet. Of course, I find very honorable the fact that such a big and worrisome issue hit as a tsunami the attention of people and activists worldwide, and I welcome the numerous initiatives devoted to cleaning up oceans and their coastlines. I'm happy to see many outdoor apparel and fashion businesses committed to recycling the recaptured ocean plastic waste in the production of new garments. Nevertheless, this is a typical example of what I would define as a concern belonging to the first superficial layer of transparency. A concern that is addressing a macro phenomenon that really belongs in the foreground of the whole picture. An example of transparency that goes one layer deeper is the concern about microplastics, specifically a layer of the picture that we cannot see with our own eyes. Even we would agree that microplastics are more disguising and polluting, and yet they didn't receive as much attention as the ocean macroplastic until the media started to report studies providing that billions of people all over the world are drinking water contaminated by microplastic fibers. This news is now spreading very fast, in a very fast way, because it stimulates our amygdala, the two clusters of neurons in our brain limbic system, which perform the primary role of processing fear, anxiety, and aggression. And in this case, we are talking about one of our most archaic, oldest sources of alarm, the fear of poison. Humans, just like rats, have a built-in fear of poison. In fact, even now, much of the change in food choices of pregnant women are related to our primitive fear of potential toxic food. As you know, growing evidence suggests that fibers from synthetic fabrics are a significant source of secondary microplastics pollution. As such, I welcome all the initiatives taken by the apparel and textile industries to direct research and development into shed-free synthetic textiles, or those that simply avoid the use of synthetic material entirely. And although science has shown that the use of microbeads in cosmetics is but a minor contributor to the global problem, I'm pleased to see how the cosmetics industry is acting responsibly by phasing out the use of microbeads in its wash-off products. So, what would be an example of a deeper layer that I would start to call deep transparency? What is one of the main blind spots in the ongoing environmental sustainability discourse? So while the UN Environmental Agency has alerted us that 8 million tons of plastic enter the world's ocean each year, we also know that approximately 30 million tons of chemicals are manufactured and used by industry every year. And this is without mentioning the so-called cocktail effect, which is the subject of more and more discussion among researchers. I still remember the Design of Prosperity conference of 10 years ago that we held in our university, when Peter Weber, the founder of bluesign, told a similarly uncomfortable truth to an audience of more than 400 students, scholars, Swedish industry, and leaders of politics. And he explained how in chemistry, 1 + 1 can equal 4. Since mixing different chemicals might alter their effect, and how doses previously considered safe suddenly become unsafe once they mix. The Stockholm Resilience Center places chemical pollution as the 9th planet boundary, referring to the most troublesome release of novel entities. Professor Johan Rockström and his team admit that at present we are unable to quantify a single chemical pollution boundary, although chemical pollution must be seen as a priority for precautionary action and for further research. So that is an example of how deep transparency can push us forward towards further research and further action. Another important point I would like to stress is the close connection and interdependency between transparency and good design. Here I use the notion of design in its real original meaning, that is the capability to project, to envision, to invent visionary concepts, formulate and conceptualize ideas that are innovative in answering problems in a systemic way. So every good design of a project that reflects what we wish to realize in society and in our business is actually a transparent, system thinking-based process. This is true not only because in order to envision an innovative framework, one should first know exactly what the real state of the things is, but also because design itself should be, at every step, a transparent process. If that is not the case, we will have either confused or dark designs. Behind confused designs, we find mostly incapacity or incompetency. Behind dark designs, uncaring or deliberately mean intent. So if good design starts from the knowledge of the state of things, it is fundamental for the textile industry to start considering how transparency could become a governance tool, not only along the entire width and depth of today's supply chain complex, from tier 1 to tier 4, but also for the 4 additional levels of the chemicals tier depth: the chemical converter, trader, the chemical formulator, blender, mixer, the chemical synthesizer, and last but not least, the raw chemical suppliers. Transparency throughout the whole supply chain? No way. That's a mission impossible. I have heard that said so many times during my consultancy. That's overwhelming. We just get to know our tier 1 suppliers. That's what many brands and retailers declare when they are, even independently if they are small, medium, or large enterprises. And I completely understand their feeling of powerlessness, but the thing is that there is no way out. Because today, more and more consumers out there are calling for deep transparency, no matter what. And since they realize that they have the ability to vote with their wallets, and they are increasingly taking on roles as activist citizens by supporting NGOs initiatives that urge companies to change their policymakers to legislate in that direction, and to finally provide them with transparency about environmental and social impact of what they buy. So let's look closely at reality. In a recent GlobeScan survey, people across the world say they hold companies responsible for everything that happens in the supply chain. It also revealed that not only do 62% of consumers across the world hold companies responsible for health and safety of products and for workers' fair wages, but 59% of them also want product transparency. Recent surveys carried out by global brands have shown that people want to have one simple, reliable, and comparable information source that brings to the surface the environmental and social impact, as well as the safety of their purchases at a glance, period. But interestingly enough, when surveys dig deeper and ask what exactly that simple information should contain, we see requests such as, I want to know the chemicals used in making my clothes are harmful for me and for the planet. I want to know if the farmers in the fields are paid enough to assure them of having a decent life. I don't want animals to be mistreated, just to mention a few of those requests. So as you know, the quest for transparency is not just limited to our industry. It is spreading as the new mantra in the worlds of business, finance, politics, media, science, etc. So how can this be explained? Why has transparency taken the pole position among the basic expectations of the many? Plenty of studies tell us that the demand for transparency derives from mistrust. In fact, the 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer highlights that current levels of trust in governmental and business leadership are at an all-time low. Last year, the GlobeScan Radar survey showed us an unprecedented large gap all over the world between a considerably high trust in scientific academic institutions or our fellow citizens, so our friends, and a very low trust level in national government, press and media, or global companies. And this is a big problem, because trust is a vital element of any well-functioning society and thriving economy. But the trust problem is not new, we are told. Declining trust has deep roots in humanity history. Cyclical trends in the ups and downs of levels of trust have always occurred. As societies and their communication media evolve, people become more knowledgeable and have higher expectations. But my point is different. This time things are different. People around the world are not just feeling mistrustful. Their mistrust of both politicians and business capacity or willingness to manage and solve their everyday practical problems while also resolving major global issues has transformed their uncertainty and doubts into fear. It is critical to understand how social movements feed into this fear, because social movements, with their use of new digital communication media, make people feel that they are not alone with their fears, but allow them and even urge them to share them, and by doing so, they can then easily step out of their fear by joining the rallying cry, becoming angry and outraged instead of feeling fearful. Present low levels of trust and high levels of anger in different parts of the world reflect a persistent backlash against the political and economic order. And I would dare to say that that's happening also because in this very moment, advances in human rights, environmental protection and restoration, as well as the fabric of democratic institutions, which have all been achieved through a lot of effort, are today under an unprecedented amount of pressure. There are many root causes for people's sentiments of mistrust, fear, and anger, and my time is too short for digressing about all of them here, but allow me to briefly mention 3 of them. So my first point is the fact that in Western world, people belonging to the lower middle class are the ones that mostly mistrust the present economic and political establishment. They are not only the many who were affected by the financial crunch in 2008 and its consequent recession, but also the many that have been forgotten in the wave of globalization. Branko Milanovic's famous elephant chart developed for the World Bank is evidence of how, in recent decades, our current economic growth model, while leading to tremendous progress and lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in emerging economies, has also resulted in the decline of Western society's middle class and in the growing inequality gap between the very poor and the very, very rich. Milanovic's elephant chart also offers a clear and easy explanation for the rise of populism. After all, the people who most mistrust the actual economic model and establishment that supports it are Brexit, Trump, Alternative for Deutschland, Swedish Democrats, Marine Le Pen, and Salvini's Lega voters. My second point is about the increasing acknowledgement of the tangible repercussion of the environmental crisis. At the mainstream level, we are witnessing the increasing frequency and intensity of disasters in both the northern and southern hemisphere, which the world-leading climate scientists link to anthropogenic climate change. And people are also starting to see the link between climate change and the already started the biblical migration flows from the south to the north of the world. 2 weeks ago, media spread the news that IPCC scientists have warned us that if we maintain our current level of commitments, the world is on course for a disastrous 3 centigrades of warming. Unfortunately, predictions about global warming leave us with only a dozen years to cap the maximum to a rise of 1.5 centigrades, beyond which even half a degree will significantly worsen the risk of drought, floods, extreme heat, and poverty for hundreds of millions of people. And regarding our industry, mass and social media are spreading the news that the apparel industry is the second largest polluter in the world. Studies show that the global apparel and footwear industries combined account for an estimated 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. That's almost as much as the European Union's today. And even in that case, media and NGOs are doing an amazing job of spotting and highlighting the troublesome social and ecological impact our sphere of activity has upon the globe. My third point is about the new paradigm of global digital communication. We are living in times in which a new organization of digital communication technology enables people to connect and access, but also provide information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Today we have 4 billion internet users, and almost 50% of the world population uses smartphones. It has been calculated that every single day people send 150 billion emails, 66 billion photos, and 42 billion WhatsApp messages. So people stay connected to web media on average 6 hours a day. And that means that every year we are spending 1 billion years online. So we are all part of a new technological paradigm based on constant access and connectedness to an ubiquitous digital neuronal information and communication system in which new media are enabling people to gather information, but even more importantly, to connect their emotions with others' emotion in the quickest and most diffuse way as never before. And I don't need to tell you how much emotions are the fuel of our human primordial cognitive system and how they can become a great accelerator of change in people's behaviors. Nevertheless, this huge new communication paradigm corresponds, on one hand, to a non-intermediated, open, and very emotional way to use the net among people. On the other hand, to a massive centralization of information about citizens/consumers that nations and big internet businesses have monopolized for public and private interests. But the point is that the same system of surveillance that gathers all the information we are ready to disclose is creating the rise of a social movement of counter-surveillance run by encryption hackers and web activists, whistleblowers, WikiLeaks agents, and citizen journalists that reinforces the birth, spread, and growth of new social movements that are also calling for a democratic debate about issues as transparency and the governance of surveillance, as well as transparency and the right to privacy in the digital age. So it's not by chance, by the way, that after the last Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandals, people, including myself, took the time to read the privacy policy agreement we all naively signed. Here I quote Google official privacy policy. The only information Google reserves the right to obtain and process is name, address, location, email, phone number, credit card number, search history, purchases, and selected contents of images. Other than that, privacy is respected. Understanding how much we are already part of what the sociologist Manuel Castells calls a neuronal system made of trillions of networks created by self-programming programs obeying to the logic of states and private companies, has created a citizen-consumer counter-movement which is driven by mistrust in the integrity and honesty of the private and public sectors and anger against the establishment as such. Circling back to the repercussion of all that on the consumer industry, let's take another close look at reality. People all across the world are changing the game by either asking or sizing, without asking, transparency about the things they consume. And this started with the concern about what they put in their body, and now they are becoming more and more concerned with what they put on their body. They are more and more inclined to think that industrial fashion, fast fashion, any fashion business model that is large scale and capital intensive is known to be sick. If the industry was not sick, they say, we wouldn't have so much large number of organizations and such a large global movement trying to cure it. I don't need to list the many third-party certifiers that are surveying the compliance of standards and sometimes even raising the bar of the needed standards improvement. If the industry wouldn't be aware of its needs of change, there wouldn't be the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which shows that almost 1/3 of the global industry is trying to change the rules of the game through transparency from the inside of the industry itself. So the truth is that the consumers of our digitally networked, fast-paced and constant learning societies are more than ever holding companies responsible for everything that happens in their supply chain. They want more than just the required product information of an actual product's label, and they will be loyal to the brands that provides them with more detailed insight, period. Frightening? Why? Is it possible that after decades of marketing and design management strategies based on the dogma of customer orientation, in which we managed to grow and thrive by satisfying every customer's imaginable and non-imaginable wish and whim, we are now stepping back and seeing this new quest for transparency as an impossible mission? It's going to be tough, I agree, because I'm sure that all of us in this room are doing our best to accompany and nudge the whole industry towards the polar star of sustainability. But we also know, better than anybody else, about the yawning gap between what needs to be and what can be done. We also know about the huge gap between the size of the problem humanity faces today and the reach and capability of the tools available to manage this today. So we all know that delivering the depth of transparency that consumers are already demanding today implies not only the transparency declaration of our good intentions, but also the massive job of tracing the whole width and depth of our company supply chain, including documenting everything at each stage, making radical changes and improvement, and eventually making all of that information and processes available in a transparent and comparable way to supplier, business partner, consumers, and civil society. And all that as quickly as possible. Because customers, people, citizens, NGOs, and policymakers are getting more and more impatient out there. But look, the fact that we are still in the process of providing full transparency regarding the whole supply chain doesn't mean that we cannot be open and start to be transparent now. Over the last few decades, the mantra of sustainability reporting has been less is more. That is, if you are not prepared with a positive impact story, it's better to say nothing. But today, in such a fast-moving social media-driven market, real, solid content of our sustainability journey, supported by data about our impact, measured with science-based tools, is fundamental. For customers, it informs choice and brand loyalty. For policymakers, it is table stakes for getting voters' consensus. And for the industry is the way for the application of new rules and laws that eventually support a sustainability-driven, fair competition. And last but not least, to investors, it's evidence of a company's strategic and management quality as well as its long-term purpose. As Lawrence Fink of BlackRock recently stated in its letter to the CEOs, companies should raise the issue of purpose as the critical North Star to guide their corporate decision, and he explicitly mentioned environmental impact, workforce diversity, community engagement among the larger issues companies must grapple with today more than ever. We should therefore not forget that investors' demand for more disclosure has dramatically grown in recent years. The recent spike in shareholders' proxy demands show that investors want more transparency on environmental and social governance risks and opportunity. And transparency is the perfect tool to be included in any materiality assessment, and it is becoming more important than ever for investors. As you can see, what we are facing is not just the need for some kind of change that is not going to reach the urgently needed U-turn. Change just for the sake of change or for keeping things as they are is not enough. Aptly, I'd like to quote the most famous line of The Leopard, perhaps the greatest Italian novel of the last century, and one that is uniquely relevant in revealing the dark side of change without the intent of transformation, when the leopard said, things will have to change if we want things to stay as they are. So let's not mistake that kind of change for transformation. Back to the wisdom of words. Transformation means going through the form, the shape of things, going to the content, the meaning of things. Transformation implies a series of changes in the content of what we do, changes which all go in the same meaningful direction, and changes that at the end of the process produce a real change of state in the content of reality. The call for a change, which today comes mostly from younger generations, implies the design of a change that makes sense and that changes the state of things. That's what we call transformation. Any transformation is the result of a long process that brings humanity to an appointment with history, with capital H. It is not just storytelling about the change of the surface of things. Transformation is not about telling stories, it's about a bold, epoch-changing, making history. As my former PhD student, David Goldsmith, says, indeed everyone, from Marx, Simmel, Barth, and Gandhi, to the conscious consumer of today known or knew that they all knew that the core promise and purpose of the fashion industry is to drive more and faster consumption. Tom Ford, the Gucci Griff, sums up the sad reality of the modern human fashion condition by saying, fashion is one of the most grueling, brutal industry in the world because we create a constant stream of product that are perishable. And it's speeding up so fast. And people consume, and they are bored. And they consume, and they are bored. And they consume, and they are bored. Yes, people are bored. And they need transformation. Starting with the design of a new vision of the future we thought we had lost. A future that we have to change, to redesign, starting by impacting cultural roots. The Riddle and Moore model of transformation illuminated me years ago about the fact that transformation, intended as durable change, certainly happens when policymakers scale up the change by establishing laws and rules, when businesses and other organizations scale out the change by impacting greater number of people and communities, but mainly, and even more powerfully, when people scale deep the ongoing transformation. And this happens when the many people's minds and hearts have been moved so deeply that their values, beliefs, and cultural practices change. On our side, this means not only the design of a new business model driven by zero-waste circular economy forms of production and distribution and linked to new sustainable models of consumption that accelerate the transition toward an ecological and just social and economic foundation, but it implies to understand fashion as a way to make alternative dreams become tangible, and to speak out alternative values, alternative beliefs, different new styles of thought, and not just styles of life. That is a titanic job, I know. But if we want to rebuild trust with consumers and not escalate their anger and outrage, we have to be honest and transparent. We must start a conversation with our stakeholders in which we should first identify our Polar Star, the purpose we share with the people and the planet, then we must talk about it, understand it as a common purpose with the many people out there, and then invite them to engage with us in the immense journey we can only embark upon together. And this means telling people in an honest way about the tension we experience daily in our work between what is actionable and what is aspirational. And starting, of course, to tell them about what we already do, we are already doing now and achieving now, because it is imperative to do so. We must also tell them about everything that we are starting to do now, and we will achieve soon, because it's actionable. But even more importantly, we must tell them in a clear way what it is in the chords of our aspiration that we will start, yes, now, to activate, but achieve in the future. So working and communicating with such a matrix of intents is also transparency. It is the example of a programmatic transparency approach used as a compass for transformation. Transparency is not the end of a linear journey. It is the point where we begin to design our future now. It is the point where we will finally look at reality as it is. Do you remember the Wizard of Oz? Let's give a look at it.
Arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you were really great and powerful, you'd keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now. Oh, the great Oz has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
Of course, just like Dorothy, we also need the coming-of-age lesson about what is really behind the curtain of the old dream we thought we were all part of. And surely we will feel a sense of acute disappointment, just as we did when we learned the truth about Santa Claus. But happily, we also realize that the real magic will be in starting a great new venture, one which designs the future in the real world, the design of a beautiful, clean, just, and flourishing future for all, including those to come, on this beautiful planet. And thank you very much for having listening to me. Thank you.